The Princess and the Goblin, Chapter 10. The Princess's King Papa. The weather continued fine for weeks, and the little princess went out every day. So long a period of fine weather had indeed never been known upon that mountain. The only uncomfortable thing was that her nurse was so nervous and particular about being in before the sun was down, that often she would take to her heels when nothing worse than a fleecy cloud crossing the sun threw a shadow on the hillside, and many an evening they were home a full hour before the sunlight had left the weathercock on the stables. If it had not been for such behavior, Irene would by this time have almost forgotten the goblins. She never forgot Curdie, but him she remembered for his own sake, and indeed would have remembered him if only because a princess never forgets her debts until they are paid. One splendid sunshiny day, about an hour after noon, Irene, who was playing on a lawn in the garden, heard the distant blast of a bugle. She jumped up with a cry of joy, for she knew by the particular blast that her father was on his way to see her. This part of the garden lay on the slope of the hill, and allowed a full view of the country below. So she shaded her eyes with her hand and looked far away to catch the first glimpse of shining armor. In a few moments a little troop came glittering round the shoulder of a hill. Spears and helmets were sparkling and gleaming, banners were flying, horses prancing, and again came the bugle blast, which was to her like the voice of her father calling across the distance, "Irene, I'm coming." On and on they came, until she could clearly distinguish the king. He rode a white horse and was taller than any of the men with him. He wore a narrow circle of gold set with jewels around his helmet, and as he came still nearer, Irene could discern the flashing of the stones in the sun. It was a long time since he had been to see her, and her little heart beat faster and faster as the shining troop approached, for she loved her King Papa very dearly and was nowhere so happy as in his arms. When they reached a certain point, after which she could see them no more from the garden, she ran to the gate, and there stood till up they came, clanging and stamping, with one more bright bugle blast which said, "Irene, I am come." By this time the people of the house were all gathered at the gate, but Irene stood alone in front of them. When the horseman pulled up, she ran to the side of the white horse and held up her arms. The king stooped and took her hands. In an instant she was on the saddle and clasped in his great strong arms. I wish I could describe the king so that you could see him in your mind. He had gentle blue eyes, but a nose that made him look like an eagle. A long dark beard streaked with silvery lines flowed from his mouth almost to his waist, and as Irene sat on the saddle and hid her glad face upon his bosom, it mingled with the golden hair which her mother had given her, and the two together were like a cloud with streaks of sun woven through it. After he had held her to his heart for a minute, he spoke to his white horse, and the great beautiful creature, which had been prancing so proudly a little while before, walked as gently as a lady, for he knew he had a little lady on his back, through the gate and up to the door of the house. Then the king set her on the ground, and dismounting, took her hand and walked with her into the great hall, which was hardly ever entered except when he came to see his little princess. There he sat down with two of his counselors who had accompanied him to have some refreshment, and Irene bestowed herself on his right hand and drank her milk out of a wooden bowl curiously carved. After the king had eaten and drunk, he turned to the princess and said, stroking her hair, "Now, my child, what shall we do next?" This was the question he almost always put to her first after their meal together, and Irene had been waiting for it with some impatience, for now, she thought, she should be able to settle a question which constantly perplexed her. "I should like you to take me to see my great old grandmother." The king looked grave and said, "What does my little daughter mean?" "I mean the Queen Irene that lives up in the tower, the very old lady, you know, with a long hair of silver." The king only gazed at his little princess with a look which she could not understand. "She's got her crown in her bedroom," she went on, "but I've not been in there yet. You know she's here, don't you?" "No," said the king very quietly. "Then it must be all a dream," said Irene. "I half thought it was, but I couldn't be sure. Now I am sure of it. Besides, I couldn't find her the next time I went up." At that moment, a snow-white pigeon flew in at an open window and, with a flutter, settled upon Irene's head. She broke into a merry laugh, cowered a little, and put up her hands to her head, saying, "Dear dovey, don't peck me. You'll pull out my hair with your long claws if you don't have a care." The king stretched out his hand to take the pigeon, but it spread its wings and flew again through the open window, when its whiteness made one flash in the sun and vanished. The king laid his hand on the princess's head, held it back a little, gazed in her face, smiled half a smile, and sighed half a sigh. "Come, my child, we'll have a walk in the garden together," he said. "You won't come up and see my huge, great, beautiful grandmother, then, King Papa?" said the princess. "Not this time," said the king very gently. "She has not invited me, you know, and great old ladies like her do not choose to be visited without leave asked and given." The garden was a very lovely place. Being upon a mountainside, there were parts in it where the rocks came through in great masses, and all immediately about them remained quite wild. Tufts of heather grew upon them, and other hardy mountain plants and flowers, while near them would be lovely roses and lilies, and all pleasant garden flowers. This mingling of the wild mountain with the civilized garden was very quaint, and it was impossible for any number of gardeners to make such a garden look formal and stiff. Against one of these rocks was a garden seat, shadowed from the afternoon sun by the overhanging of the rock itself. There was a little winding path up to the top of the rock, and on the top another seat, but they sat on the seat at its foot because the sun was hot, and there they talked together of many things. At length the king said, "You were out late one evening, Irene." "Yes, Papa, it was my fault, and Ludi was very sorry." "I must talk to Ludi about it," said the king. "Don't speak loud to her, please, Papa," said Irene. "She's been so afraid of being late ever since. Indeed, she has not been naughty. It was only a mistake for once." "Once might be too often," murmured the king to himself as he stroked his child's head. "I cannot tell you how he had come to know. I am sure Curdie had not told him. Someone about the palace must have seen them, after all." He sat for a good while thinking. There was no sound to be heard except that of a little stream which ran merrily out of an opening in the rock by where they sat, and sped away down the hill through the garden. Then he rose, and leaving Irene where she was, went into the house and sent for Ludi, with whom he had a talk that made her cry. When in the evening he rode away upon his great white horse, he left 6 of his attendants behind him, with orders that 3 of them should watch outside the house every night, walking round and round it from sunset to sunrise. It was clear he was not quite comfortable about the princess. Chapter 11. The Old Lady's Bedroom. Nothing more happened worth telling for some time. The autumn came and went by. There was no more flowers in the garden. The winds blew strong and howled among the rocks. The rain fell and drenched the few yellow and red leaves that could not get off the bare branches. Again and again there would be a glorious morning followed by a pouring afternoon, and sometimes, for a week together, There would be rain, nothing but rain, and then the most lovely cloudless night, with the sky all out in full-blown stars, not one missing. But the princess could not see much of them, for she went to bed early. The winter drew on, and she found things growing dreary. When it was too stormy to go out, and she had got tired of her toys, Ludi would take her about the house, sometimes to the housekeeper's room, where the housekeeper, who was a good, kind old woman, made much of her, sometimes to the servants' hall or the kitchen, where she was not princess merely, but absolute queen, and ran a great risk of being spoiled. Sometimes she would run of herself to the room where the men-at-arms whom the king had left sat, and they showed her their arms and accoutrements, and did what they could to amuse her. Still at times she found it very dreary, and often wished that her huge great-grandmother had not been a dream. One morning the nurse left her with the housekeeper for a while. To amuse her, she turned out the contents of an old cabinet upon the table. The little princess found her treasures, queer ancient ornaments, and many things the uses of which she could not imagine, far more interesting than her own toys, and sat playing with them for 2 hours or more. But at length, in handling a curious old-fashioned brooch, she ran the pin of it into her thumb and gave a little scream with the sharpness of the pain, but would have thought little more of it had not the pain increased and her thumb begun to swell. This alarmed the housekeeper greatly. The nurse was fetched, the doctor was sent for, her hand was poulticed, and long before her usual time she was put to bed. The pain still continued, and although she fell asleep and dreamed a good many dreams, there was the pain, always in every dream. At last it woke her up. The moon was shining brightly into the room. The poultice had fallen off her hand, and it was burning hot. She fancied if she could hold it into the moonlight, that would cool it. So she got out of bed, without waking the nurse who lay at the other end of the room, and went to the window. When she looked out, she saw one of the men-at-arms walking in the garden, with the moonlight glancing on his armor. She was going to tap on the window and call him, for she wanted to tell him all about it, when she bethought herself that that might wake Ludi, and she would put her into bed again. So she resolved to go to the window of another room and call him from there. It was so much nicer to have somebody to talk to than to lie awake in bed with a burning pain in her hand. She opened the door very gently and went through the nursery, which did not look into the garden, to go to the other window. But when she came to the foot of the old staircase, there was the moon shining down from some window high up, and making the worm-eaten oak look very strange and delicate and lovely. In a moment she was putting her little feet, one after the other, in the silvery path up the stair, looking behind as she went to see the shadow they made in the middle of the silver. Some little girls would have been afraid to find themselves thus alone in the middle of the night, but Irene was a princess. As she went slowly up the stairs, not quite sure that she was not dreaming, suddenly a great longing woke up in her heart to try once more whether she could not find the old lady with the silvery hair. If she is a dream, she said to herself, then I am the likelier to find her if I am dreaming. So up and up she went, stair after stair, until she came to the many rooms, all just as she had seen them before. Through passage after passage she softly sped, comforting herself that if she should lose her way, it would not matter much, because, when she woke, she would find herself in her own bed with Ludi not far off. But as if she had known every step of the way, she walked straight to the door at the foot of the narrow stair that led to the tower. What if I should really find my beautiful old grandmother up there, she said to herself as she crept up the steep steps. When she reached the top, she stood a moment listening in the dark, for there was no moon there. Yes, it was. It was the hum of the spinning wheel. What a diligent grandmother to work both day and night. She tapped gently at the door. "Come in, Irene," said the sweet voice. The princess opened the door and entered. There was the moonlight streaming in at the window, and in the middle of the moonlight sat the old lady in her black dress with the white lace, and her silvery hair mingling with the moonlight so that you could not have distinguished one from the other. "Come in, Irene," she said again. "Can you tell me what I am spinning?" She speaks, thought Irene, just as if she had seen me 5 minutes ago, or yesterday at the farthest. "No," she answered. "I don't know what you are spinning. Please, I thought you were a dream. Why couldn't I find you before, great-great-grandmother?" "That you are hardly old enough to understand, but you would have found me sooner if you hadn't come to think I was a dream. I will give you one reason, though, why you couldn't find me. I didn't want you to find me." "Why, please?" "Because I did not want Ludi to know I was here." "But you told me to tell Ludi." "Yes, but I knew Ludi would not believe you. If she were to see me sitting spinning here, she wouldn't believe me either." "Why?" "Because she couldn't. She would rub her eyes and go away and say she felt queer, and forget half of it and more, and then say it had all been a dream." "Just like me," said Irene, feeling very much ashamed of herself. "Yes, a good deal like you, but not just like you, for you've come again, and Ludi wouldn't have come again. She would have said, no, she had had enough of such nonsense." "Is it naughty of Ludi, then?" "It would be naughty of you. I've never done anything for Ludi." "And you did wash my face and hands for me," said Irene, beginning to cry. The old lady smiled a sweet smile and said, "I'm not vexed with you, my child, nor with Ludi either, but I don't want you to say anything more to Ludi about me. If she should ask you, you must just be silent, but I do not think she will ask you." All the time they talked, the old lady kept on spinning. "You haven't told me yet what I am spinning," she said. "Because I don't know. It's very pretty stuff." It was indeed very pretty stuff. There was a good bunch of it on the distaff attached to the spinning wheel, and in the moonlight it shone like, what shall I say it was like? It was not white enough for silver. Yes, it was like silver, but shone gray rather than white, and glittered only a little. And the thread the old lady drew out from it was so fine that Irene could hardly see it. "I am spinning this for you, my child." "For me? What am I to do with it, please?" "I will tell you by and by, but first I will tell you what it is. It is spider's webs, of a particular kind. My pigeons bring it to me from over the great sea. There is only one forest where the spiders live who make this particular kind, the finest and strongest of any. I have nearly finished my present job. What is on the rock now will be quite sufficient. I have a week's worth there yet, though," she added, looking at the bunch. "Do you work all day and night too, great-great-great-great-grandmother?" said the princess, thinking to be very polite with so many greats. "I am not quite so great as all that," she answered, smiling almost merrily. "If you call me grandmother, that will do. No, I don't work every night, only moonlit nights, and then no longer than the moon shines upon my wheel. I shan't work much longer tonight." "And what will you do next, grandmother? Go to bed? Would you like to see my bedroom?" "Yes, that I should." "Then I think I won't work any longer tonight. I shall be in good time." The old lady rose and left her wheel standing just as it was. You see, there was no good in putting it away, for where there was no furniture, there was no danger of being untidy. Then she took Irene by the hand, but it was her bad hand, and Irene gave a little cry of pain. "My child," said the grandmother, "what is the matter?" Irene held her hand into the moonlight that the old lady might see it, and told her all about it, at which she looked grave. But she only said, "Give me your other hand," and having led her out upon the little dark landing, opened the door on the opposite side of it. What was Irene surprised to see the loveliest room she had ever seen in her life. It was large and lofty and dome-shaped. From the center hung a lamp as round as a ball, shining as if with the brightest moonlight, which made everything visible in the room, though not so clearly that the princess could tell what many of the things were. A large oval bed stood in the middle, with a coverlid of rose color and velvet curtains all round it of a lovely pale blue. The walls were also blue, spangled all over with what looked like stars of silver. The old lady left her, and going to a strange-looking cabinet, opened it and took out a curious silver casket. Then she sat down on a low chair, and calling Irene, made her kneel before her, while she looked at her hand. Having examined it, and took from it a little ointment, the sweetest odor filled the room, like that of roses and lilies, as she rubbed the ointment gently all over the hot, swollen hand. Her touch was so pleasant and cool that it seemed to drive away the pain and heat wherever it came. "Oh, grandmother, it is so nice," said Irene. "Thank you, thank you." Then the old lady went to a chest of drawers, and took out a large handkerchief of gossamer-like cambric, which she tied around her hand. "I don't think I can let you go away tonight," she said. "Do you think you would like to sleep with me?" "Oh, yes, yes, dear grandmother," said Irene, and would have clapped her hands, forgetting that she could not. "You won't be afraid, then, to go to bed with such an old woman?" "No, you are so beautiful, grandmother. But I am very old, and I suppose I am very young. You won't mind sleeping with such a very young woman, grandmother?" "You sweet little pertness," said the old lady, and drew her toward her, and kissed her on the forehead and the cheek and the mouth. Then she got a large silver basin, and having poured some water into it, made Irene sit on the chair, and washed her feet. This done, she was ready for bed. And oh, what a delicious bed it was, into which her grandmother laid her. She hardly could have told she was lying upon anything. She felt nothing but softness. The old lady, having undressed herself, lay down beside her. "Why don't you put out your moon?" asked the princess. "That never goes out, night or day," she answered. "In the darkest night, if any of my pigeons are out on a message, they always see my moon, and know where to fly to. But if somebody besides the pigeons were to see it, somebody about the house, I mean, they would come to look what it was and find you." "The better for them, then," said the old lady. "But it does not happen above 5 times in 100 years that anyone does see it. The greater part of those who do take it for a meteor, wink their eyes, and forget it again. Besides, nobody could find the room except I please. Besides, again, I will tell you a secret. If that light were to go out, you would fancy yourself lying in a bare garret on a heap of old straw, and would not see one of the pleasant things round about you all the time." "I hope it will never go out," said the princess. "I hope not, but it is time we both went to sleep. Shall I take you in my arms?" The little princess nestled close up to the old lady, who took her in both her arms, and held her close to her bosom. "Oh dear, this is so nice," said the princess. "I didn't know anything in the whole world could be so comfortable. I should like to lie here forever." "You may if you will," said the old lady, "but I must put you to one trial. Not a very hard one, I hope. This night week you must come back to me. If you don't, I do not know when you may find me again, and you will soon want me very much." "Oh, please, don't let me forget." "You shall not forget. The only question is whether you will believe I am anything but a dream. You may be sure I will do all I can to help you to come, but it will rest with yourself after all. On the night of next Friday you must come to me. Mind now." "I will try," said the princess. "Then good night," said the old lady, and kissed the forehead which lay in her bosom. In a moment more, the little princess was dreaming in the midst of the loveliest dreams, of summer sea and moonlight, and mossy springs and great murmuring trees, and beds of wildflowers with such odors as she had never smelled before. But after all, no dream could be more lovely than what she had left behind when she fell asleep. In the morning, she found herself in her own bed. There was no handkerchief or anything else on her hand, only a sweet odor lingering about it. The swelling had all gone down. The prick of the brooch had vanished. In fact, her hand was perfectly well. End of chapter 11. Please go to the next clip for chapter 12.